sharp knife of a short life. Well, I've had just enough time. If I die young, bury me in.
I've talked a lot about Crupperneck and my grandmother's house. Talked a lot about that. But I've never really talked about my grandmother. She was the strongest person I ever knew. I know she would always say what was on her mind. When she'd meet young ladies, she would say, "You're so pretty and fat." She would say that to almost everybody. She'd be proud of me today because I'm getting fat. But she would say what she thought about this virus thing. She would just blow that off. She would just blow this virus thing off. She lived by herself for 20-some years. She didn't have running water. She had to draw her water. She had to gather wood and build the fire, and she would take ashes out. She was a strong person. I sat with her in 4 funerals. She outlived all of her kids. And I sat there with her, and I was just amazed how strong a person she was. She loved outdoors. She had an old cow for a long time, and she'd try to teach me how to milk a cow. And she would just talk to that cow like it was a person. She loved to garden. She loved to garden. And in the fall of the year, we would go down to her house, all of us, 8 or 10 people. We'd go in her house and we had to eat. You could not get away from her without eating. So we went in and we ate, and it was always really good. Home-cooked food, always good. And then we'd go outside to her garden. We all had hoes and shovels, and we would surround her garden. And somebody would light a fire in the middle of the garden, and we would watch as the fire would burn off all the old plants and brush and stuff. We would stay there until the fire went out. She would not let us leave until every spark of that fire was out. And her garden was a black charcoal color. It would lay there all winter. And in the spring, somebody would plow it, and they would disc it and smooth it out, and they'd plant grass seed. And then eventually they'd come back and they'd plow the garden, and she would plant it. That was new ground. She loved to burn off her garden, but she was scared to death of fire. She wouldn't let anybody leave until every spark was out. She was scared to death of fire for good reason. Her house burnt down one time, burnt all the way to the ground. Now, back then, there was no such thing as a fire department. She had no neighbors close. She had plenty of friends and neighbors, but they were far away from her house. And she had to watch her house burn all the way down. She would run in and get stuff. She would try to save stuff. She would run in and get stuff and bring it back out. Run in and get stuff and bring it back out. But eventually her house was just ashes. I remember her telling that story as we were sitting around in her house. And I remember my dad saying, "Well, what did you save? What was so important in that house? What did you run in and run out? What did you gather?" And she said, "I gathered pictures of family." She said, "That's what I went in to get and bring back out." She said, "That was the most important thing in that house." And I remember my dad saying, "Well, if you had to do it again, what would you go in and try to get out?" She didn't hesitate. She said the same thing. Pictures. That's what was important to her as her house was burning down. That's what she ran in and got and brought back out. Jesus led his disciples to the Mount of Olives. And as he stood on the Mount of Olives, he could just look over on another hill. And that's where he was crucified. And that's where he died. He led his disciples to the Mount of Olives. And he gave them instructions. He said, all power and authority is given to me in heaven and on earth. And he looked at his disciples and he said, go into the world, teaching people what I taught you. He gave them specific instructions, teaching them, baptizing them in my name, and I will be with you always, even until the end of the age. And Jesus was taken up to heaven. The disciples and the people looked. And an angel said, this same Jesus that had been taken up will return again. But Jesus also said something else in his ministry. He said, I will send help. After I leave, I'll send help. I'll send someone that will testify to me and lead you to the truth, that will convince and convict you of the truth of the good news. 10 days later, the disciples were all gathered in one place, and there were other people, I think maybe in a marketplace. And all of a sudden, something happened. All these people were from different parts of the world, and they began prophesying the good news of the gospel. And each one of them understood the good news in his or her own language. And they went into the world telling the people this message. Pentecost, flames of fire settled on them, and they spoke in language that people could understand. Not confusion. They understood, each and every one of them. They understood the message of the gospel. They took it to the world. Pentecost. What is Pentecost? A lot of people says it's the birthday of the church. I would agree with that. I would agree with that. But also, remember when Jesus was walking in a village and there were people around, and Jesus said, who do they say that I am? And Peter eventually says, you're the Son of the living God. You are the Christ. And Jesus says, upon this I will build my church. Upon this, upon the acknowledgement that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God. That was the beginning of the church also. And also where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name. 2 or 3 are gathered in the name of Christ. There the church is also. What's happened to the church? What's happened to the church? It has changed so much in my lifetime. We were given instructions, and they are clear, to go tell the good news. That is clear. It's not confusion. But sometimes the church is a body of confusion. I'm talking about the universal church, the whole church. So much stuff, so many things, so much politics, this and that. Remember the instructions. He sent help to empower us, to tell people what the church should be. You know, my grandmother watched her house burn. And she ran in and she got the most important things in her life. The church, if it burned, if it was destroyed, the organized church, what would you run in and pull out? What is the most important thing? Decision about Jesus Christ. He is the church. Belief and trust in Him is the church. That's not confusion. That is the truth of the gospel. Amen.
And I'll be wearing white when I come into your kingdom. I'm as green as the ring on my little gold finger. I've never known the loving of a man, but it sure felt nice when he was holding my hand. There's a boy here in town says he'll love me forever. Who would have thought forever could be severed by the sharp knife of a short life? Well, I've had just enough time. So put on your best, boys, and I will wear my pearls. What I never did is done. A penny for my thoughts, oh no, I'll sell them for $1. There were so much more